In terms of leadership style, leadership is of course always dependent on the circumstances you're in. But most of the leaders, actually, we came across this research while we were doing the project by Steve Dinham, where he looks at typologies of leadership, and I kind of tend to be a bit suspicious about some of those typologies, but you know, sometimes they have something in it. What actually won me over to it was what he wrote about the authoritative style of leadership, because when I read it, I've got to take off glasses, it actually sounded like the principles that were involved in our study. And essentially what he said of them is they are responsive, warm and supportive. They are sensitive to a diversity of individual and collective needs and are inclusive. They are good listeners and collaboratively build consensus and commitment. The personal qualities of the authoritative leader are admired by most, but not always all. Authoritative leaders are also demanding. They are clear in their expectations of themselves, staff and students. They communicate high standards and set an example of what others seek to emulate. They are assertive without over-reliance on the rules and sanctions of the authoritarian leaders. Authoritative leaders give a lot and expect a lot. And then he goes on, and there's quite a bit more, but rather too long to read now. So leadership is absolutely key. The second factor, which someone also mentioned, of course, and is on the list, was high levels of expectation and teacher efficacy. Essentially, the kind of catchphrase, and several of them almost use identical words, is that we have to create schools and classrooms in which we'll put our own kids. And that was the kind of argument that they tended to put continuously. They also really challenged the argument you can't expect more from these kids. In fact, their argument reversed it and said that we get a fair chunk of disadvantaged money in our school. If we direct that money to the right ends, we should be setting goals and targets that are higher than comparable SFO schools. Every single one of the schools set targets to achieve mean levels that accord with the level for the state as a whole. None of them set their level with reference to their SFO band, and they achieved it. In a sense, the high expectations for students then actually were used to build this feeling amongst staff that they have the capacity to make a difference to the kids that they teach. And that actually matters, because there's research that we found which shows that when teachers have a strong sense of individual efficacy, a strong sense that they can actually make a difference, they put more effort into planning lessons, are more open to new ideas and persevere in the face of new challenges. We quote the research in the larger report, if you look at the larger report on the website. But what's particularly promising about that is that those attitudes are not fixed. They're not immutable, someone's perception of their own efficacy. It is something that's open to the action of the school and the leadership, and that can be built, not just through exhortation, because in fact what we know increasingly is that what changes thinking and values is not exhortation to do so, but in fact changing behaviour. When you change the behaviour, when you change what people do, you start to change the way they think if they see it to have effect. The third precondition that we found, and someone's mentioned it, I'm pleased to say, and back to the question about did we find something new? We thought this was new. Every single one of the schools started with a focus on ensuring an orderly learning environment. Basically, there were two reasons for that. I'll put these up now, actually. First, because, as we all know, in the absence of an orderly learning environment, kids can't learn. That's the kind of obvious reason. The second reason was in some ways more interesting. For each of these schools, it was the starting point for their improvement program, because it was the easiest entry point to getting teachers working consistently. And they had identified the difference between teachers and the lack of consistency as a significant barrier to improvement in the school. Fundamentally, they came to the conclusion that if we can actually clarify what it is that we expect, what are the ways in which it will be played out, what are the consequences, and what is it therefore that we will commit to consistently do, not only would they get the initial hit of the impact of that, but they could leverage off it to build consistency in other aspects of the operations of the school.